No, I'm really excited about this word. John chapter 4. John chapter 4. Living with urgency in days of panic. Living with urgency in days of panic. John chapter 4, starting in verse 31. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. So the disciples were saying to one another, no one brought him anything to eat, did he? And Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages, and is gathering fruit for life eternal, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this case, the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. Lord, thank you this morning for the great worship we've had. And thank you for, God, what you're already doing. And so, Lord, I pray that even now you'd speak to us. In Jesus' name, amen. I do want to say we missed Billy this morning. Billy is on a much-needed kind of short vacation rest. And for those of you who don't know, Billy is our worship pastor. And they're off for a weekend away, which is a good thing. The boy was tired. He needed to get away. He was making me tired. So anyway, no, I'm kidding. I love him. I really do. So this morning, when you study the word urgency, you find words like decisive, determined, intense, resolve, tenacity, importance, and purposeful. Now, this word marked the life of Jesus. And it's a word that is important to us and should also mark us as believers. You see, there's a difference between living with urgency and living in panic. Our world lives in panic. As believers, we need to live in urgency. And so when I'm talking about this, the difference between urgency and panic is a word, it could be a difference between preparation, and panic's driven by the unknown, urgency's driven by the known. Panic's driven by the unprepared, urgency is driven by the prepared. For instance, on the campus, it's finals week at Truett McConnell University. Those that are prepared, they are living with some urgency in their preparation. They might have a little bit of anxiety about the finals just because they get test anxiety or something. Those that are unprepared are in panic. They're walking around in a daze because they haven't slept. Because all the projects that they knew about all semester are now coming upon them. And so caffeine has become a spiritual gift for them. And so all those things, y'all remember those days? That's my life. I live my academic career in panic, not urgency. Okay? My wife lived them in urgency. She's the kind of person that she would go and take a test, and after she took it, she'd come out talking about how she failed it. It was miserable and all that kind of stuff. And then when I called later, she said, well, how'd you do it? She said, well, I made 100. I, on the other hand, if I said I failed, I knew I failed. I wasn't living in any kind of false hope. The reality was, and if I knew I passed it, I'm telling you, I passed it. I told you, if I said I did good, I knew I did good. I was never in any doubt either way. Y'all, any witnesses here in that regard? I mean, I'm just telling you, that's how I just live. So there's this issue of living in urgency and living in panic. Panic is driven by fear. I want to give you a good acronym for fear. False evidence appearing real. That's fear. False evidence appearing real. There's a lot of false evidence in our world today that people are trying to make appear real. But it's false evidence appearing real. And so that creates this panic of our life. We live in a world of panic right now. And it's panic driven. And so we need to get this issue here. So we're going to see from Jesus how Jesus lives a life of urgency and what that looks like when we live a life of urgency like we should. Now, the first thing we're going to see is that Jesus prioritized the material over the spiritual. Look what it says here. In verse 31, they said, disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. You see, here's Jesus. Jesus is sustained and secured by the invisible. The disciples are still locked up in this visible realm. It sounds a lot like Jesus is defining faith for them before Paul defined faith in Hebrews. Remember in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, Paul wrote, and that's who I think wrote Hebrews. I'm sorry, some of y'all will disagree with that. You're entitled to being wrong. So anyway, I will say Paul and Barnabas co-wrote it. Luke could have been engaged in it, but that's a conversation for a whole other time. So listen to what it says, the writer of Hebrews. So some of you will be okay. The writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 11, 1 and 2, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval. See, invisible doesn't mean it's not existent. Invisible means it's not seen. There are substantive things that are invisible but are very necessary. Air, oxygen. I'm breathing in air. I can't see it right now, but how do I know it's visible? I'm not dead. Electricity. We see the results of electricity, but we don't actually see electricity. Now, we might see the evidence of it in a spark or something, but we all live a great deal of our life based on invisible things that we take as visible realities. And so Jesus is saying to them, listen, I know you're worried about my eating habits right now, but I'm being sustained. The invisible is more of a necessity to me than the visible. There's an old saying that goes like this: if you don't see it before you see it, you'll never see it. Y'all ever heard that? If you don't see it before you see it, you'll never see it. I can give you an example of here at this church. Walking in and seeing what I could not see yet, but knowing that it was going to happen. Now, that's not claiming anything. I'm not a name it and claim it guy. I'm not living in a prosperity gospel realm. I just could see what God could do here. And I believe that God would do it here. And so walking in faith, I come seeing what I'm not yet to be seen. But if I don't, listen, if you don't see the possibility and the potential, then you probably don't see the potential. Did y'all get that? You've got to see it before you see it, or you'll never see it. That's why you don't recognize it. That's why we don't enjoy things. We don't take time to enjoy what God's done and what God's doing. And so one of the things that I always want to do is assess what God's done. Even though I couldn't see it before it happened, but it becomes reality in the happening of it, and then we get to celebrate it. It's seeing those things. It's seeing the potential. It's seeing what only God can give you to see, and that's what we see. See, so Jesus' life, how did He get here? Jesus' life was marked by submission, service, and sacrifice. Now here's the kicker. His life was marked by service, submission, and sacrifice. How did He learn all those things? Suffering. Suffering was His teacher, and suffering will be our teacher. That's how we learn things. A lot of what we learn is that way. Listen again what the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 5, verses 7 and 8. In the days of His flesh, He offered up both prayers and supplication with loud crying and tears to the one able to save Him from death. And He was heard because of His piety. Although He was a son, He learned obedience from the things which He suffered. How many of you, if we had a testimony time, could come up here and give testimony of things that God taught you through suffering? Really? You raise your hand. Yeah, I learned a lot through suffering. See, we learn through two basic venues: wisdom and experience. Wisdom is much better and less painful. Experience costs more, and it takes a little bit more time, and it has pain usually attached to it. For instance, growing up, if I was obedient and I did what my parents asked me to do, and I adhered by their rules, then I did much better. If I did not, I would learn by suffering. Suffering usually came with a belt. That's right. I grew up in the age where whipping was acceptable. DFACS was not a government agency. The facts were, if I didn't do what I was told, I was getting my bottom whooped. That's the facts were to me. I'm just telling you. So I'm just saying, so I would learn through those things. So how many of you could, if you were sitting back there and you just raised your hand, you sit there and all the things that God taught you through suffering. Now here's the thing about it. The quicker you learn in suffering, the less you suffer. the longer it takes, the more suffering it gets. In other words, if you're stubborn, it's going to sting longer. Amen? Just tell you. I'm just saying, go back to the analogy. My dad was saying, you better be still or it's going to be... Now, that was always something. And here's something I didn't understand. Don't you dare cry. Wait a minute, you just whooped the snot out of me. What do you expect? Some of you are going, whoop the snot out of that. It's a Greek term for it was very harsh. So anyway... So sometimes, how does Jesus learn these things as He's talking about what He's doing? He's talking about that I'm learning to do this through suffering. I'm learning what God's doing in my life. It's costing me something. So I'm learning service. I'm learning submission. I'm learning sacrifice through all these things that I'm suffering. So God doesn't waste pain, but we sure do. Because we'll get hard-headed. So He's talking about urgency now. He's living a life of urgency, and this urgency has service, submission, sacrifice involved in it. So why does Jesus do this? What's this motive that we're talking about? Well, He tells us in verse 34, my food is to do the will of Him who sent me and to accomplish His work. You see, people who are fully surrendered will always be a mystery to those who aren't. The disciples are going, Jesus, would you please eat? Would you please eat? And He said, listen, I've got food that you don't know about. And they're going, who fed Him? How is He doing this? Have you ever noticed or seen this in your life where people that are fully surrendered, fully sacrificed, fully submitted, they're sometimes agitating to others who aren't? You see it in athletics sometimes. Maybe there's that athlete that's just compliant and doing everything they can to do not only what their coach asks them to do, but they'll stay a little bit longer afterwards to practice. They'll go to the gym when nobody else goes to the gym. They'll do what they need to do, and sometimes they go, oh, look, they're just sucking up. They're just trying to be impressive. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just motivated to do more in order to accomplish more. You see the same thing in the work world, that there could be somebody that works really, really hard and they're eager to stay longer and do more and stuff like that, and somebody goes, look, they're just trying to impress the boss. Maybe. But isn't that biblical that we should always work to impress those who are in authority over us? Why is it that those who are willing to sacrifice more to accomplish more always are in agitation to the mediocre and the subpar? Have you ever noticed that? Because we live in a world that we're willing to let those who do more, but we're going to criticize them for it. You ever found that out? The people who do less are more adept at criticizing those who do more. I mean, really, I'm always fascinated. When I go to football games, I was at North Hall the other night. My friend Bob Christmas came, and I got to see Coach Bishop. I hadn't seen him in a little bit, and they had a big win. And so we're down there, and I don't like, Stacy will tell you, I don't like watching high school sports from the stands because parents are insane. I mean, they think their children are all stud D1 players and all that kind of stuff, and they're not. They're like you. Can I get a witness? So it's always fascinating to me, like in Athens, let's go back to the day before COVID, there were 90,000 people in desperate need of exercise criticizing 11 who didn't need it. I'm going to move on. But people who are fully surrendered will always be a mystery to those who aren't. See, knowing the will of God is about submission to a master and not solving a mystery. See, what he knew was my job is to do the will of him who sent me. My nourishment, My necessity is to be in the will of God. Now, what he wasn't saying is I don't need food, but what he was saying, I need the presence and the power of God more than I need a biscuit. That's it. And so he was willing to forgo the buffet in order to get before his Father, because he knew, bottom line is, I can live longer without the food. I can't live a day without my Father. And so that's what his urgency was. His urgency and his motive was clear. He was fully surrendered to the spiritual relationship he had with his Father. And that meant more to him in the substance of life than any meal could ever be. And again, he's not saying you don't need food. What he is saying as a believer to live a life of urgency is that you desperately need the presence, the power, and the person of Jesus in your life to accomplish what only God can accomplish. And it's an urgent need. It's what wakes you up in the morning. It's what grabs you when nothing else gets a hold of you. It's understanding that I can't do what God's called me to do unless God does the work, and I can't get God to do the work without me spending incredible, intentional, and passionate and purposeful time with God above anyone or anything else. Amen. That's urgency. That's what it means to live in urgency. That was his motive. That's what gripped him. And so we sit out here, and so he knew the will of God. He knew it. See, faith is never about the preservation of self. It's about the promotion and production of God's plan in order to please God. You know what the Apostle Paul understood? That he didn't have to survive in order for God to succeed. I found out in my life when it doesn't matter. God loved that one. When it doesn't matter who gets the credit, things get done much better. It just does. And so Jesus wasn't coming here to preserve his legacy or do anything else. He was coming here totally surrendered to the will of God. It's the whole thing again. It's in Hebrews chapter 11. Listen to this as I just read this, and starting in verse 32. He says, "And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, of Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated. Men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect." Man, that's the kind of life I want to live as a believer. I want to live a life that the world's not worthy of. That's living in the urgency of what God has for us. See, once we surrender our crown for God's cross, it's amazing how simple life gets. Now, simple doesn't mean easy. But that's what Jesus did in Philippians 2. He took on the form of a servant. He left the throne in order to go to the cross. He put down his crown to take up his cross so that we could pick up the cross in order to enjoy his crown. He became nothing. Nothing. So that we could experience everything. It's amazing when you live a life of service, submission, and sacrifice, what God will do and the urgency that will exist in that moment. So once again, once we surrender our crown for God's cross, it's amazing how simple and clear life becomes. It makes our mission very clear. Verse 35, he says, "Do you not say there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that They are white for harvest. Here we see both the urgency and clarity of Jesus' mission. You see, what we want most will always determine what we see best and sacrifice the most for. What we want most will always determine what we see the best and sacrifice the most for. Because his motive was so dominant, his mission was so definite, and Jesus would not allow the temporal to master the eternal. And so Jesus clearly understood risk versus reward. See, I think it's worth noting that Jesus came to accomplish God's work and not attempt God's work. I've come to accomplish the work of my Father. It's my desire that we as a church seek to be on a mission of accomplishment of God's work and not some kind of attempt God's work. You know, Jesus was often asked some very petty questions. You ever notice that? Jesus was asked petty stuff. But very rarely did he engage in petty conversations. He usually walked away. Or he'd give a short answer and just move on. He didn't engage in useless debates. I found in my life that when I am rightly motivated, I am clearly on mission, how little I get tangled up by petty things. I mean, I just realize it just don't matter. So I'm just saying that I find I really don't have time for the petty. You know, or just sit there. And I also find out, which means we've got to be rightly submitted and able to see what God would have us see. And so what did he have them focusing on? He had them focusing on the harvest. He said, you see out there, you look out there, and he talks about you see the field, it's white at the harvest. You say 4 months more. I'm telling you, it's ready now. There is a field that is waiting for the church. And I wish that the church was more ready for the field than we are. But there's never been a time in history where the world needed the church to be the church more than today. But yet there seems to be, the church is not willing to be that today. We get hung up on the style in which we do stuff. We get hung up on all these other things. We're not having substantive conversations about the gospel. Or either we've redefined the gospel to be something that it's not. The gospel is life-changing. It's transforming. I want to help you understand something. It's not the mission of the church to save the world. It's the mission of the church to rescue people from it. The world is passing away. You know, we all make jokes about the beauty contestants who get up there and said, I want world peace. It ain't going to happen. I often say this, the reason there's going to be peace forever in heaven is because there's no marriage in heaven. Y'all all right? So, amen. Say amen. Now, some of you are probably scared right now. And you should be. All right? But, you know, we keep talking about this whole thing about, man, we got to save the planet. No, here's the deal. Find me where it says that as a believer, I'm to solve the hunger problem. It says I'm to serve the hungry. Where am I supposed to solve poverty? I'm to help the poor. Matter of fact, Jesus said you'll always have the poor with you. Find me where Jesus healed all the sick people on the earth at the time of his existence, or where he healed all the sick people that ever met him. See, he didn't come to make them for the world. He came to make us for himself. My family ever knows. If my family knows me to be godly, if my family knows that the man in the pulpit is not different than the man in the living room, that's a win for me. So you can pray that, and that's not an arrogant prayer, that's really a prayer. I want to be the godliest man my family knows. 2, I want to live in such a way that heaven's not a change. A big change anyway. 3, I want to take as many people with me as I go when I leave. Those are the 3 prayers of my life. And then I live that in urgency, knowing that every day is an opportunity to serve the Lord. That I'm urgently committed to those things, that I'm urgently about those things. You see, let me help you here. And if you're visiting today, you picked a good day because this is going to come up because you kind of know where we're headed. I'm not interested in being a consumer-driven church. I'm not interested in coddling Christians who won't grow up. Will we show compassion? Yes. Will we help comfort those that are hurting? You better believe it. And we're going to go reach lost people. But I'm not here to scratch every itch that your trendy world creates for you. We want to equip you, we want to engage you, and we want to send you. When you fall, we want to help pick you up. When you're hurting, we want to help you heal. And when we come across lost people, we want to introduce them to Jesus Christ, who's not lost, but who is the hope of our life.